In the quiet town of Evergreen Valley, struggling single dad and skilled mechanic, Daniel Roberts is barely keeping his repair shop afloat while raising his teenage daughter alone. When Millionaire CEO Margaret Kensington's luxury car breaks down during a storm, what begins as a routine roadside repair becomes life-changing. As Daniel works on her vehicle, he notices a distinctive antique ring on her finger, identical to a treasured family heirloom his grandfather lost decades ago. This chance encounter sets in motion an extraordinary journey that connects two seemingly separate worlds, uncovers a long-buried injustice, and gives both Daniel and Margaret a second chance at what they've each been missing. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Rain hammered the roof of Dixon Auto Repair as Daniel Roberts wiped his callous hands on a shop rag that had seen better days. The clock on the wall read 8:45 p.m. Another late night. Through the garage door window, he could see his 15-year-old daughter, Sophia, sitting in the small office area. Textbooks spread across the desk as she worked on her math homework by the glow of a desk lamp. Daniel sighed as he glanced down at the engine he'd been working on. 5 more hours of labor. And maybe, just maybe, they could afford the electric bill this month without dipping into Sophia's college fund again, a fund that was already dangerously depleted. "Hey, Dad," Sophia called from the office. Mr. Jenkins texted, "He made that chicken pot pie you like and left it in our oven. He used his key." Daniel smiled despite his exhaustion. "Tell him thanks. We shouldn't be too much longer." As Sophia returned to her homework, Daniel's gaze lingered on her. She had her mother's eyes, intelligent, determined, kind. Christine had been gone 5 years now, but sometimes the grief still hit him like a physical blow, especially on nights like this, when he felt the weight of raising their daughter alone, of trying to give her everything she deserved despite their circumstances. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Daniel wiped his hands again and picked up the phone. "Dixon Auto Repair. This is Daniel." "Hello," a woman's voice replied, cultured but with an edge of concern. "My car has broken down about 5 miles outside of town on West Ridge Road. I tried calling for a tow, but was told it would be at least 3 hours. The man I spoke with suggested I try you directly." Daniel glanced at the clock again, nearly closing time, and the storm was getting worse, but they needed the money. "I can be there in 15 minutes. "What seems to be the problem?" "I'm not sure. The engine just died. All the warning lights came on at once." "What kind of car?" "A Mercedes S-Class, 2022 model." Daniel raised his eyebrows. Nobody in Evergreen Valley drove a car like that. "I'll be there soon. Do you have somewhere dry to—" "Wait, I'm still in the car. Thank you for coming out in this weather." Daniel hung up and grabbed his emergency toolbox and rain jacket. "Sophia," he called. "We've got a roadside call. You want to wait here or come with me?" Sophia appeared in the doorway, already packing up her books. "Come with you. Mr. Jenkins will worry if I'm here alone this late." 10 minutes later, Daniel's old pickup truck splashed through puddles on West Ridge Road, wipers working overtime against the downpour. Sophia sat quietly beside him, gazing out at the stormy night. "You did great on that math test," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "Ms. Gomez told me." Sophia shrugged. but he caught her small smile. It was just algebra. Just algebra, Daniel chuckled. You know, when I was designing safety systems, I had engineers with degrees who couldn't work through the equations you're doing at 15. You miss it, don't you? The engineering work. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel sometimes. But Dixon's is good work, too. Honest work. But it's not what you trained for. Not what you loved. Before Daniel could respond, his headlights illuminated a sleek black Mercedes pulled onto the shoulder ahead. Parked behind it was a blue sedan. Unexpected. Looks like someone stopped to help already, Daniel remarked as he pulled over. As they approached the Mercedes, Daniel could see a woman sitting inside, talking on her phone. She noticed them and quickly ended her call, stepping out under a large black umbrella. Even in the poor lighting, Daniel could tell her raincoat cost more than his monthly rent. Her driver's side door remained open, interior light spilling out into the rainy darkness. "Mr. Roberts?" she asked. "I'm Margaret Kensington. Thank you for coming so quickly." "Daniel, please, this is my daughter, Sophia." Margaret nodded at Sophia with a genuine smile. "Hello, Sophia." "What about the other car?" Daniel asked, gesturing to the blue sedan. "Oh, that's Thomas, my driver. He was following me back from Chicago. I was driving myself today." Daniel nodded, processing this information. A woman wealthy enough to have a driver, yet choosing to drive herself. Interesting. Let me take a look. Daniel approached the Mercedes. "When did it start acting up?" "About 20 minutes ago." The engine made an unusual sound. Then several warning lights appeared, and it gradually lost power until I had to pull over. Daniel gestured toward the hood. "Mind if I?" Margaret said, stepping aside as Daniel popped the hood and set up a portable work light. Margaret turned to Sophia, who was standing awkwardly in the rain, despite her jacket. "Would you like to wait in my car where it's dry? The heater was working fine until everything else failed." Sophia looked at her father, who nodded. "Thank you," Sophia said, slipping into the passenger's seat. Margaret joined Daniel at the front of the car, holding her umbrella over both of them. "Is it serious?" "Could be several things. Best case, a sensor malfunction. Worst case," Daniel trailed off as he examined the engine. "Any unusual sounds before it died?" "A slight whirring, followed by a clicking." Daniel nodded, his experienced hands moving methodically through his diagnostic routine. "Expensive car like this shouldn't be failing on the highway." "That's what the dealership promised," Margaret said with a hint of frustration. "Though to be fair, I've pushed it rather hard the past few months. Too many long drives, not enough maintenance." Daniel glanced up. There was something refreshingly honest about her admission. Most wealthy clients he'd encountered would have blamed the manufacturer, the mechanic, anyone but themselves. "Looks like your timing chain tensioner failed," he said after a few minutes. "Damaged some valves in the process." "That sounds expensive for a Mercedes." "Very, but I can get you back on the road tonight. At least enough to get you home or to a dealership. It won't be a permanent fix." Margaret nodded. "That would be wonderful. Though I'm keeping you and your daughter out in this awful weather." "It's our job," Daniel replied simply. As he worked, Margaret occasionally handed him tools, surprising him with her knowledge of what he needed. The rain continued to pour around them, but they established a comfortable rhythm. From time to time, Daniel glanced into the car where Sophia appeared to be showing Margaret something on her phone, both of them laughing. "Your daughter seems very bright," Margaret commented. "She is top of her class, wants to study engineering, following in her father's footsteps." Daniel paused. "How did you know I was an engineer?" Margaret smiled. "The way you approach the problem, methodical, analytical, not just looking for symptoms, but understanding the system." Daniel resumed working. "That was a lifetime ago." "What happened?" Margaret asked, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, that's personal. You don't have to answer." "No, it's okay." Daniel secured a bolt before continuing. "I worked for Hole Industries developing automotive safety systems. Had a prototype that could have reduced accident fatalities by almost 40%. But then he stopped, wondering why he was telling his life story to a stranger in the rain. "Corporate politics. Let's just say I took the fall for someone else's mistake. Nobody in the industry would touch me after that." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "That's terrible. Was it worth it? Taking the blame? 15 people would have lost their jobs. People with families, mortgages. My team," Daniel shrugged, "seemed worth it at the time. Less sure now when I look at Sophia and what she's had to sacrifice." As Daniel reached across the engine, his work light illuminated Margaret's hand as she steadied herself against the car. On her finger was a ring, gold, with an unusual pattern of interlocking circles surrounding a small ruby. The craftsmanship was distinctive, unlike anything modern. Daniel froze, staring at the ring. His heart pounded in his chest. "Mr. Roberts, Daniel, is everything all right?" "That ring," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Where did you get it?" Margaret glanced down, clearly surprised by the question. "It was my grandmother's, a family heirloom. Why do you ask?" Daniel swallowed hard. "My grandfather had one exactly like it. It's been lost for years, but I'd recognize that design anywhere. He was a jeweler before the war. Said it was part of a match set he made for twin sisters." Margaret finished, her eyes widening. "Elizabeth and Catherine Harmon. That's what my grandmother told me." They stared at each other in disbelief as the rain pounded around them. "Dad," Sophia called from the car. "You okay?" Daniel blinked, returning to the task at hand. "I'm fine, sweetheart." He turned back to the engine, mind racing. It couldn't be a coincidence. The ring, the design, the story. But how could Margaret Kensington be connected to his grandfather's past? "I've got it stabilized," he said, closing the hood. "It'll get you home, but no, Father. The timing's still off. And you risk more damage if you push it?" Margaret seemed equally distracted now. "Thank you. What do I owe you?" Daniel named a modest sum, far less than an emergency call warranted. Margaret reached for her purse, then paused. "Daniel, would you and Sophia join me for dinner tomorrow at my place? I'd like to hear more about your grandfather and the ring." Daniel hesitated. People like Margaret Kensington didn't invite people like him to dinner. "And yet," he found himself saying, "we'd be honored." "Wonderful. The lake house on Cherry Blossom Drive, 7 o'clock. Daniel nodded, then watched as Margaret returned to her car. Sophia climbed out, rejoining her father as the Mercedes started with a rumble that was far from healthy but functional. "She's nice," Sophia said as they walked back to their truck. "Not what I expected." "No," Daniel agreed, watching the tail lights disappear into the rainy night. "Not what I expected at all." As they drove home, Daniel couldn't shake the image of the ring from his mind. After Christine died, he'd stopped believing in fate or destiny. But tonight, in the middle of a storm, on a random service call, he'd seen a piece of his family's past resurface in the most unlikely place. Whatever connection existed between Margaret Kensington and his grandfather's ring, Daniel knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Dixon Auto Repair earlier than usual. He needed time alone with the old metal lockbox he kept hidden beneath the floorboards of the shop's office, a collection of his grandfather's personal effects that had survived decades of moves and life changes. The shop was quiet, still an hour before Clarence would arrive to open up. Daniel knelt on the worn linoleum floor, prying up the loose board to reveal the dusty box beneath. He hadn't looked inside for years, not since right after Christine's funeral, when grief had driven him to search for connections to his own past. The hinges creaked as he opened the lid. Inside lay an assortment of yellowed photographs, handwritten letters, and a small leather journal. Daniel rifled through them until he found what he was looking for, a faded photograph of his grandfather standing proudly outside his jewelry shop, circa 1952. Daniel turned it over to read the inscription, Joseph Roberts, Roberts Fine Jewelry, Chicago. Chicago, Daniel whispered to himself, the same city where Margaret Kensington's business was headquartered. He continued searching until he found a small sketch in his grandfather's precise hand, a design for a pair of rings with interlocking circles surrounding a gemstone. In the margins were notes. E and C Harmon, twin sisters, gold, buy. Symbol of eternal connection. The bell above the shop door jingled, startling Daniel. "Daniel, you in here already?" Clarence's voice called out. Daniel quickly replaced the contents, slid the box back into its hiding place, and returned the floorboard. In the office, he answered, brushing dust from his knees as he stood. Clarence Dixon appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. At 68, he moved slower than he once had, but his mind remained sharp. "You're here awful early. Everything okay?" "Fine. Just catching up on some paperwork." Clarence eyed him skeptically. "Heard you went out on a call last night. Must have been important to drag you and Sophia out in that storm." "Mercedes broke down on West Ridge. Timing chain tensioner." "Mercedes? Huh?" Clarence whistled low. "Tourist?" Daniel hesitated. "Not exactly. Margaret Kensington said she has a lake house here." Recognition flashed across Clarence's face. "The Kensington place. That mansion's been sitting empty for years. Heard some Chicago big shot bought it recently. Guess that's her." Daniel nodded, his mind still on the ring in the sketch. "She pay you properly for an emergency call?" "She did. Actually invited us to dinner tonight." Clarence's eyebrows shot up. "Dinner with a Kensington? Well, Daniel Roberts moving up in the world." Daniel shook his head. "It's not like that. Just..." He paused, unsure how to explain. Thank you, I guess." The phone rang, saving Daniel from further explanation. As Clarence answered it, Daniel escaped to the garage to prepare for the day's appointments. But his thoughts remained fixed on the connections between his grandfather's ring design and the woman who had appeared so unexpectedly in his life. By late afternoon, anxiety had begun to gnaw at Daniel's stomach. He hadn't been to a social dinner in years, Not since before Christine's illness had consumed their lives, and certainly never at a lakeside mansion. "Dad? We're going to be late," Sophia called from their small bathroom where she was attempting to tame her dark curls with limited success. "Almost ready," Daniel replied, though he was still staring at his meager wardrobe with despair. He finally settled on his one decent pair of slacks and a blue button-down shirt Christine had bought him for their last anniversary together. Wilfred Jenkins was waiting outside when they emerged from their modest single-story home. "You two look nice," the elderly man commented from his porch across the street. "Hot date, dinner invitation," Daniel explained, helping Sophia into their truck. "Don't wait up, Wilfred," the old man chuckled. "At my age, I never wait up. Dorothy and I will leave the porch light on." The drive to Cherry Blossom Drive took them from their working-class neighborhood to the affluent Lake District, where Evergreen Valley's wealthiest residents owned summer homes. As they approached the address Margaret had given them, Sophia gasped, her face pressed to the window. "Dad, that can't be it," she whispered as Daniel turned into a long, winding driveway that led to an elegant craftsman-style house overlooking the lake. The home wasn't as ostentatious as Daniel had feared, large but tasteful, with warm lighting glowing from within. Daniel parked his battered truck next to a sleek BMW and Margaret's newly repaired Mercedes. Before they could reach the front door, it swung open to reveal Margaret herself, dressed casually in slacks and a simple blouse. "You found it! Come in, please!" She welcomed them inside, where the aroma of home-cooked food filled the air. Daniel was surprised. He'd expected a professional chef for catering, not what appeared to be Margaret's own cooking. "I hope you like lasagna," she said, leading them through to a spacious kitchen. "It's my grandmother's recipe. One of the few things I can make without burning down the house." "It smells amazing," Sophia said, visibly relaxing at the informal atmosphere. "Would you like some help?" Daniel offered. "Actually, yes. The salad still needs tossing." As Daniel assisted Margaret with final dinner preparations, he noticed there were only 3 place settings at the dining table. No staff, no driver, no business associates, just the 3 of them. It felt strangely intimate. Over dinner, conversation flowed more easily than Daniel had anticipated. Margaret asked Sophia about school, listening with genuine interest to the teenager's passionate explanation of her science project involving alternative energy sources. "That's quite impressive," Margaret said. "We fund research grants in that area through the Kensington Foundation. Perhaps you'd consider applying for our youth science initiative next year." Sophia's eyes widened. "Really? That would be amazing. Though I warn you," Margaret added with a smile, "the competition is fierce. But based on what you've told me, you'd be a strong contender." As they finished the main course, Daniel finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind all day. "The ring? Would you mind if I looked at it more closely?" Margaret nodded, slipping the gold band from her finger and passing it to him. "It's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother told me it was specially made for her mother." Daniel examined it carefully, comparing it to the memory of his grandfather's sketch. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. The intricate pattern of interlocking circles, the precisely set ruby, the minute inscription inside the band, J.R. Fine Jewelry, Chicago, 1952. Daniel read aloud. "Those are my grandfather's initials, Joseph Roberts." He passed the ring back to Margaret, their fingers brushing momentarily. "He had a small shop in downtown Chicago after the war. He always said these rings were special, made for twin sisters who'd been separated as children and reunited as adults. Margaret stared at him, her composure faltering for the first time. That's exactly the story my grandmother told me. Elizabeth and Catherine Harmon separated during the Depression when their parents couldn't afford to feed both children. One was sent to relatives, the other kept. They found each other 20 years later and commissioned matching rings to symbolize their reconnection. Daniel finished. My grandfather designed them, specifically with interlocking circles, an eternal bond that couldn't be broken again. Margaret touched the ring thoughtfully. Elizabeth was my great-great-grandmother. She always said the ring's match was lost when her sister, Catherine, moved west in the late 50s. Which is how it ended up with my grandfather, Daniel realized. He moved the family to California in '58. Must have taken the second ring as payment or a keepsake. He always said it was meant to be returned someday, but he lost touch with the family. A heavy silence fell between them, the weight of this unexpected connection settling in the room. It's remarkable, Margaret finally said. Out of all the mechanics in the area, I happened to break down where you would find me. I don't believe in coincidences, Daniel admitted. Neither do I. As Margaret served coffee and a simple apple tart for dessert, the conversation shifted to their current lives. Daniel found himself opening up about his work at Holay Industries and the safety system he'd developed before his career collapsed. The prototype was revolutionary, he explained. His passion for the work still evident. It used predictive analysis to detect potential collision scenarios seconds before they occurred. Enough time to deploy protective measures beyond standard airbags. It could have saved thousands of lives. What happened? Margaret asked. Daniel's expression darkened. Edward Holloway happened, the CEO's son. He was heading the project officially, but he was rarely present, more interested in corporate politics than the engineering. When the first prototype failed during a demonstration for investors, he needed a scapegoat. So he blamed you, Margaret concluded. I let him. The alternative was watching my entire team get fired. I figured I could find another job with my credentials. Daniel laughed bitterly. I was wrong. Holloway made sure no one in the industry would touch me. That's despicable, Margaret said, genuine anger in her voice. Dad never fought it? Sophia interjected, surprising both adults. He should have. His design wasn't the problem. Someone tampered with the prototype the night before the demonstration. Dad knew it but couldn't prove it. Daniel stared at his daughter. How did you know that? Mom told me before she died, Sophia said. She said it was important I knew what kind of man my father really was. That integrity like yours is rare. Daniel swallowed hard, unprepared for the emotion that surged through him at his daughter's words, at the realization that Christine had understood and valued his choice, even as they struggled with its consequences. Margaret watched them with unmistakable compassion. Your wife sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Daniel agreed softly. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret walked them to the door. I'm glad you both came tonight. I'd like to continue our conversation. Perhaps see if we can solve the mystery of how these rings became separated. And Daniel, she hesitated. I'd be interested in hearing more about your safety system sometime. My company invests in automotive technology, among other things. Daniel tensed immediately, weary. I appreciate the interest, but that part of my life is over. Margaret nodded, accepting his boundary. Of course. Either way, I hope you'll visit again. It gets rather lonely up here. Lonely? Sophia asked. But you're so successful. Margaret smiled sadly. Success and happiness aren't always the same thing, Sophia, something I've learned the hard way. On the drive home, Sophia was uncharacteristically quiet. You okay? Daniel asked. She's different than I expected, Sophia finally said. More real. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone cold, I guess. But she made her grandmother's lasagna recipe and cares about the same things we do. Sophia paused. And I think she was genuinely interested in your safety system. That's in the past, Sophia. Why? Because Edward Holloway said so? There was an edge to his daughter's voice he rarely heard. Mom wouldn't have wanted you to give up on it. She believed in you. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter but remained silent. When they arrived home, Sophia headed straight to her room, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. He found himself standing before the small fireplace mantel where Christine's photograph held the place of honor. Next to it was a small wooden box, the one that had once contained his grandfather's other treasures, including the sketch of the rings. What do you think, Chris? He whispered to the photograph. Is this all just coincidence or something more? The photograph offered no answers. But as Daniel prepared for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had been set in motion. The connection between the rings, between his grandfather and Margaret's family, between his past work and her current interests, it all seemed too purposeful to be mere chance. For the first time in years, Daniel fell asleep with something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it for what it was. Hope. A week passed without further contact from Margaret. Daniel tried to convince himself it was for the best. People from different worlds rarely found lasting connections. Yet, he couldn't deny his disappointment each time the phone rang at the garage, and it wasn't her voice on the line. You've been checking your phone every 5 minutes, Marco commented as they worked side by side on a transmission rebuild. The younger mechanic had been with Dixon Auto Repair for 3 years and had become something of a friend to Daniel. Hot date ghosting you? Daniel shot him a look. Just expecting a parts delivery? Sure, Marco smirked. Parts delivery? That's why you've been walking around looking like someone stole your dog all week. Before Daniel could respond, Clarence poked his head into the garage. Daniel, got a call you might want to take. Line 2. Daniel wiped his hands and picked up the shop phone, aware of Marco and Clarence exchanging knowing glances. This is Daniel. Hello, Daniel. It's Margaret Kensington. Daniel turned away from his colleague's obvious eavesdropping. Margaret, good to hear from you. I apologize for not calling sooner. I was called back to Chicago for an emergency board meeting. I'm actually still here, but I wanted to follow up on our conversation. Her voice became more hesitant. I've been doing some research on your grandfather's jewelry shop and found some interesting connections to my family. What kind of connections? The kind better discussed in person. I'll be returning to Evergreen Valley tomorrow. Would you be available for lunch? I'd have to check the work scale, Daniel said, glancing at Clarence, who was making exaggerated gestures indicating he should accept. Of course. I understand you have commitments. No, it should be fine. Where and when? The Ridge Cafe at noon. I've heard they make excellent sandwiches. They do, Daniel confirmed, surprised at her choice of the modest local diner rather than one of the upscale restaurants by the lake. After setting the details, Daniel hung up to find both Marco and Clarence staring at him with undisguised curiosity. "Margaret Kensington, huh?" Clarence said, folding his arms. "The millionaire from Chicago." "We're just discussing some family history," Daniel explained. "Her great-great-grandmother knew my grandfather." Clarence raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And I'm secretly Elvis Presley." "It's not like that," Daniel insisted, returning to the transmission. "She's just interested in the connection." "Right," Marco said. "Millionaires are always super interested in family connections to small-town mechanics." Daniel ignored them, focusing on his work, but their words echoed in his mind. What did Margaret Kensington really want from him? The Ridge Cafe occupied the corner of Main Street and Elm, its large windows offering views of Evergreen Valley's modest downtown. Daniel arrived 5 minutes early, suddenly self-conscious about his work clothes. He changed his shirt but still wore his shop jeans and boots. There hadn't been time for more. He spotted Margaret already seated in a booth by the window. She was dressed down in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair gathered in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, more approachable, and somehow even more beautiful. "Daniel," she smiled as he slid into the booth opposite her. "Thank you for making time." "No problem. Clarence practically shoved me out the door." "Your boss? More like a second father these days," Daniel admitted. "He's been looking out for Sophia and me since we moved here." The waitress, Tina, approached with a pot of coffee. "Hey, Daniel." "The usual." "Please." "And for your friend?" Tina asked, eyeing Margaret with poorly disguised curiosity. "I'll have the turkey club, please," Margaret said pleasantly. "And coffee would be wonderful." As Tina departed, Margaret leaned forward. "I brought some things I thought might interest you." She opened a leather portfolio and removed several photographs and documents. "These belong to my grandmother," she explained, passing him a black and white photograph of 2 young women standing arm in arm outside a jewelry shop. Elizabeth and Catherine Harmon, 1952, the day they received their rings. Daniel studied the image with fascination. "That's my grandfather's shop." He pointed to the sign visible in the background. "Robert's Fine Jewelry." "Yes." "And this," Margaret continued, sliding forward a yellowed receipt, "is the original purchase record." Daniel examined the faded paper. In his grandfather's distinctive handwriting was an itemized bill for 2 gold rings with ruby settings, custom design, along with the date and the Harmon sisters' names. "I've been to the Chicago Historical Society archives," Margaret explained. "Found these among their records of small businesses from that era. I also discovered this." She passed him a newspaper clipping from 1959 bearing the headline, "Local Jeweler Loses Shop in Suspicious Fire." Daniel scanned the article, which detailed how Joseph Roberts's jewelry store had burned down under circumstances the fire department called questionable. "My grandfather never talked about this," Daniel said softly. "He always said he left Chicago for better opportunities out west." The article mentions he was in a dispute with a local businessman over a property line, a businessman named Harold Kensington. Margaret met his eyes. "My grandfather?" Daniel looked up sharply. "Your grandfather forced mine out of business?" "It appears so." Margaret's expression was pained. "Harold Kensington was not a good man. He built his real estate empire through intimidation and occasionally illegal tactics. When your grandfather refused to sell his shop, my grandfather apparently took matters into his own hands. Daniel sat back, processing this revelation. So the rings were separated because my grandfather was driven out of Chicago by your grandfather. Yes. And I think Catherine's ring, the one your grandfather kept, was meant to be a reminder of the injustice. Margaret hesitated. There's more. After finding these records, I had a private investigator look into the Hole Industries incident that ended your career. Daniel stiffened. You did what? I needed to understand if history was repeating itself, Margaret said calmly. If powerful men in my circle were still destroying honest people's lives. And what did your investigation find? Daniel asked, his voice tight. Evidence that Edward Holloway deliberately sabotaged your prototype. The investigator located a former security guard who witnessed Edward entering the lab the night before the demonstration. He was paid to keep quiet. Daniel's hands clenched around his coffee mug. I knew it. I always knew it. The guard is willing to testify now. He's terminally ill and wants to clear his conscience. Why are you telling me this? Daniel demanded. What do you want from me, Margaret? Their conversation paused as Tina delivered their food, eyeing them curiously before departing. Margaret waited until they were alone before answering. 2 things. First, I want to make amends for what my family did to yours. The Kensington Foundation has a restoration fund specifically created to right historical wrongs committed by my grandfather. Your family deserves compensation. I don't want your money, Daniel said flatly. I understand that, but consider it for Sophia's future. Her college education shouldn't be compromised because of what happened to you. Daniel fell silent, unable to argue against his daughter's interests. And the second thing, she finally asked, I want to help you rebuild your safety system properly this time with financial backing and legal protection from people like Edward Holloway. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Why would you do that? Because it could save lives, Margaret said simply, and because I believe in justice. Edward Holloway stole your work and your reputation. I want to help you reclaim both. Daniel pushed his barely touched sandwich aside. So this is all about guilt. Your grandfather destroyed my grandfather's business, and now you want to ease your conscience. Hurt flashed across Margaret's face. That's not fair, is it? The wealthy Kensington swooping in to rescue the struggling mechanic, making everything right with her millions. That's not how I see it, Margaret said quietly. How do you see it then? Margaret met his gaze directly. I see it as 2 people connected by history being given a chance to right old wrongs. I see your brilliant mind being wasted on oil changes when you could be saving lives. And yes, I see an opportunity to ensure my family's fortune finally does something truly worthwhile. Daniel wanted to argue, to reject her offer outright, but the sincerity in her eyes gave him pause. I need time to think about this, he finally said. Of course. Margaret removed a business card from her purse. My private number. When you're ready to talk, call me. She hesitated. And Daniel, this isn't charity. It's an investment in you, in your work, and in what we could accomplish together. As Margaret paid the bill despite his protests and walked out of the cafe, Daniel remained seated, turning her card over in his hands. Through the window, he watched her slide into her Mercedes and drive away, her words echoing in his mind. Later that afternoon, as Daniel worked methodically on a brake job, Sophia burst into the garage, her face flushed with excitement. Dad, you'll never believe what happened. She waved a letter in her hand. I got accepted into the regional science competition. Ms. Gomez submitted my alternative energy project. Daniel smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. That's fantastic, sweetheart. The winner gets a full scholarship to the Engineering Summer Institute at West Ridge University, Sophia continued, practically bouncing. The best young engineers in the country go there. Daniel's smile faltered. That's in Chicago, isn't it? Sophia nodded eagerly. 10 weeks of advanced engineering instruction, but her excitement dimmed. The registration fee is $2,000 even if I win the scholarship for tuition. Daniel's heart sank. $2,000 might as well have been $2 million with their current finances. We'll figure something out, he promised, though he had no idea how. I know we will, Sophia said, her faith in him unwavering. Oh, and Miss Gomez wants to talk to you. She said it's important. Teresa Gomez had been Sophia's math teacher for 2 years, one of the few educators who truly appreciated his daughter's brilliance. Daniel called her that evening after closing the shop. Daniel, thank you for calling, Teresa said. I wanted to discuss Sophia's project for the competition. It's exceptional work, but she needs access to proper testing equipment to finalize her prototype. What kind of equipment? The kind usually found in university labs, not high schools, Teresa explained. I've tried reaching out to colleagues at Westridge Community College, but no luck. Daniel thought of Margaret's offer, of the resources she could provide. His pride wrestled with his desire to give Sophia every opportunity. I might know someone who can help, he said finally. Let me make a call. After saying goodnight to Teresa, Daniel sat on the porch steps of their small home, Margaret's business card in his hand. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Across the street, Wilfred and Dorothy Jenkins sat on their own porch, their silhouettes visible in the gathering dusk. Daniel thought about his grandfather, forced from his livelihood by Margaret's grandfather, about his own career destroyed by Edward Holloway, about the cycles of injustice that seemed to follow his family. But he also thought about Sophia's excitement, her potential, her dreams that deserved a chance to flourish, and about Margaret's genuine desire to make things right. With a deep breath, Daniel dialed the number. Hello, Margaret answered on the second ring. It's Daniel. I've been thinking about your offer, and I'm not ready to commit to rebuilding the safety system. That's complicated, Daniel paused, but there's something else you might be able to help with. Something for Sophia. As he explained about the science competition and the equipment Sophia needed, Margaret listened attentively. Of course I can help, she said when he finished. The Kensington Foundation has a mobile STEM lab we send to underserved schools. I can have it brought to Evergreen Valley High next week. That's more than I expected, Daniel